The Brown Bear is one of the most important pubs remaining in Berwick, if only for its name. The bear and tree have been a symbol of Berwick since at least the early 13th century. Centuries ago, a pub was somewhat different to what we are used to today. A public house was just that. Anyone could brew their own ale and sell it in their house, usually a front parlour. This was still the case in the 18th century, and many small pubs had small breweries on the premises. The story of the Brown Bear can be said to go back to the 1720s at least, but not our Brown Bear. In May 1724 and 1725 we find adverts in the Newcastle Courant advertising the annual Lamberton races in June, and among them we find horses are to be shown and entered at Mr. George Temple's at the Sign of the Bear in Bridge Street. George Temple was a member of a prominent Berwick family. He was born in about 1680 and died in 1750. After this there is no further mention of the Sign of the Bear. So what's that got to do with the Brown Bear in Hyde Hill? Well, George Temple was a Presbyterian and one of the first trustees of the Low Meeting House founded in 1719 behind the Brown Bear. He owned the land. 19th century deeds give primacy to the Low Meeting House and refer to the land upon which it is built, together with the Brown Bear, a blacksmith's shop, and another shop. A general rule of thumb is that the footprints of plots of land remain the same throughout the ages. A new building within a row of other buildings can only occupy the same space as its predecessor, and we can see exactly the same layout of buildings as now in this detail from a topographic map of 1590. Here we see a street front building with a side entrance to the yard at the back and a range of buildings behind it. Sadly, no mention of the Brown Bear can be found in the 18th century, but another Ursine inn, the White Bear, was situated in Hyde Hill and mentioned between 1725 and 1765. As George Temple owned the Bridge Street Sign of the Bear, it is possible the White Bear may have been on his land in Hyde Hill and later shed its winter fur to become the Brown Bear. Even if the White Bear was elsewhere, it is possible that a pub did exist on the site of the Brown Bear. It is impossible to determine when the Brown Bear was established. The first mention of it is in Robert Good's Directory of 1806, when the innkeeper was Joseph Brown. There were then a succession of landlords until, in 1866, William Moore took the pub, followed 10 years later by his son George. Little is known of the building at this time, save what can be gleaned from one photograph, the 1852 Ordnance Survey map, and an obituary of a later landlord. This photograph clearly shows an archway on the right, signed Entrance to Church of Scotland. 3 ordinary doors front the street. Comparison with the map shows that the middle door matches the area marked on the map with an elongated diagonal cross. Like that at the church entrance, this indicates a cross passage, or fennel, as the feature is known locally. To the right is a door associated with a window with blinds and a barber's pole above this door, and we see the barber in the entrance. To the left of the central fennel is another door, and windows which appear to be whitewashed. Above the central doorway is a sign proclaiming the Brown Bear Inn, George Moore. The Brown Bear started as a back room. An obituary to a later licensee in 1922 describes the old Brown Bear and confirms this. In the old days, entrance to the licensed house was up a narrow passage. Internally, the house was dark, badly ventilated, and totally out of keeping with modern times. A side entrance to the old Brown Bear led from the yard leading to the Scotch church, which was situated at the top of the yard. The pub then expanded, taking over the room at the front, the windows whitewashed to afford customers some privacy from prying eyes, perhaps. It is probable that the rear-range dwellings were 2-story buildings, arranged as sets of 2 ups and 2 downs, as shown on my plan. By 1835, it would appear the Brown Bear had expanded into the rear range. A newspaper from then reported the case of a lodger stealing a silver watch from the wife of landlord Neil Anderson, suggesting there were spare rooms to be let. Above the front of the pub was a relatively large assembly room for functions such as weddings, with windows looking over Hyde Hill. These will be the first floor windows in the photograph, and this arguably strengthens the notion that the room below must also belong to the pub. Everything considered, the pub appears to be quite small and probably not the most salubrious of establishments, though as the moors were in place for 30 years it must have been prosperous enough. The end of the 19th century ushered a new age, not only for Berwick at large, but also the story of the Brown Bear. By 1891, George Moore's wife had died and all his children had flown the nest, apart from 35-year-old Janet. He called lost orders for the last time and died in 1899, and with him died the old Brown Bear. Business was good for the Border Brewery at this time. It may have been this that prompted the company to bring the Brown Bear up to date to welcome the new century, and so, in 1898, at the height of pub building in Britain, they commissioned local architect Robert Marshall of 2 Ivy Place to bring some high Victorian metropolitan glamour to the Bear. His proposal was to demolish the entire assemblage of buildings and replace it with a grand gin palace. The front building is more imposing than its predecessor. Large windows flank the door, framed by barley twist iron pillars and iron scrollwork foliage aping medieval designs popular with Victorians. Above these Gothic features the neoclassical takes over. 3 windows are topped by pointed and curved pediments, and above them a parapet with blind balustrade sections hides the pent roof sloping down to the rear. I've redrawn Marshall's plans and we can see them here. His plan intended a similar building footprint as the original pub. Perhaps surprisingly to anyone who has only known the pub in recent years, the bar was confined to the area at the front with the counter running across the building. In Marshall's notes, he instructs the builder that the range of buildings at the rear are to be demolished as well as that at the front. However, this appears not to have happened. This was probably down to finance. Why rebuild what is essentially there already? That the basic idea was approved can be judged by the formation of the parlour. This was a wooden partition with frosted glass windows to let daylight into the corridor, which led to the living area at the rear. Physical evidence for the old building remaining can be found upstairs in the rear range. No one would build a corridor like this from scratch. Its uneven nature points to the adaptation of older stock. We see also the remains of what used to be a central stair arrangement, but it cannot be the same as was drawn by Marshall. Marshall's plans show 2 reception rooms for the family above the front bar. Yet again, this arrangement is not what the evidence in the building shows. The wall between the modern living room and kitchen is not a simple one. Below the ornate cornice in both rooms is a thick architrave defining the outline of an opening. This would have been an assembly room, which was deemed more important than palatial accommodation for the family. The arch held a folding partition to subdivide the room, as can be seen in this example in Wellington Terrace. This was confirmed by the son of the landlord in the 1960s and 70s, and a former member of staff told me that the 2 rooms had been created as recently as the 1990s. This is not entirely surprising, as many large inns and hotels had such an assembly room, indeed as had the old Brown Bear. Unsurprisingly, it was not a good start for the new pub. Locals of the "It's I Been" persuasion did not welcome the change. The 1922 obituary cited earlier continues. When the new place was built, the critics pronounced it a white elephant. Townspeople had for so long been used with the old order that they looked with suspicion upon the new up-to-date building, the first of the modern licensed houses in the town. Under Mr. Morley, the house soon became a success. Thomas Morley had been a wine and spirits merchant in partnership with Robert Noble in Bridge Street. The Brown Bear under his reign was a complete success, very popular with farmers and businessmen alike. Another major structural change to the pub occurred in about 1968 when long-standing landlord Alex Gibson and his wife Peggy took over. The central staircase and the parlour were removed, and the legendary Tartan Lounge, so called after the carpet, was born. A new circular bar was installed to serve the new lounge, where music was a common entertainment at weekends. After Alex and Peggy retired in 1980, the Brown Bear was taken over by Walter and Maureen Turnbull. They, in turn, were succeeded by Sandy and Marion Middlemas in 1983, and it was shortly after they took it over that the Bear underwent its last major change, arguably the most drastic since 1898, the opening up of the ground floor. In the 1960s and 70s, attitudes to drinking in pubs were changing. Young people were looking for their own identity, not for them the spit and sawdust pubs their fathers had frequented. These young people demanded greater entertainment. Televisions and jukeboxes found their way into the bar. Darts had always been popular, but pool was becoming more popular, as were new distractions such as gambling machines and electronic video games. The old layout of the Brown Bear could not accommodate any of these, and so the entire ground floor of the building was opened up with a completely new layout to cater for this younger clientele. The dividing wall between the front room and the Tartan Lounge was ripped out and a bar laid along much of the length of the north wall. Gone were the traditional stools and tables. In came a more relaxed bank seating arrangement around the walls. This extended into the Tartan Lounge, and what had been the family sitting area was added into the arrangement to form an area for the pool table. And this is basically what we still see today, though the yard now has a vast seating area as well. Thank you for listening to this piece. I'd love to hear your memories of the Brown Bear, and especially see any old photographs you have of the interior.